Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. My name is Toyin Sani. It's a pleasure to welcome you to the session on unlocking women's financial inclusion in Africa. And today we're going to be examining the state of play with respect to financial inclusion in Africa, and especially as regards women. We're going to be listening to an expert, and also we're going to be listening to some very great speakers. To kick off the conversation, I would like to invite our expert from Deloitte, and her name is Olashubomi Oshibodu, Senior Manager, Risk Advisory at Deloitte. Please come up, Shubomi.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and I would like to use this opportunity to thank everyone for joining this program. So very quickly, I would like to touch on unlocking women's financial inclusion in Africa, and specifically speaking to key things that we need to know. The African woman has always played an eminent role in the social economic life of every society since history can actually recall. From the women in the boardroom to entrepreneurs running small, medium, and large-scale enterprises, the African woman has actually contributed a quota to making an economic impact on our immediate and extended community. On this forum today, we're going to be exploring financial inclusion as a key enabler for empowering the African woman to achieve her potentials. And there's been a lot of studies that have been done across Africa with regards to women's financial inclusion. And based on the data available so far, it actually calls out a gap in female financial inclusion in Africa. Specifically looking at what the International Monetary Fund's research has actually identified, they had mentioned that increasing women's access to and use of financial services have both economic and societal benefits. Women's financial inclusion can be transformative for any economy that chooses to make this priority. Now, looking through what we have on the screen, you will see that there's a survey that has been conducted on the adult population for both male and female. And this survey was actually carried out by AFIS Financial Services for Nigeria. And it appears that the number of women that currently has bank accounts still falls within 37 percentile, while we have 48% of men. Now, this actually shows that there's still a gap that needs to be closed. Also, looking to the right-hand side of the slide, you will then see that, across the sub-Saharan Africa, there's also a survey that was done by the Global Index database, and this also speaks to women who have bank accounts. And over the years, since 2011 to 2017, there's been a significant change. Now, the framework further went ahead to analyze that long-term solutions could actually lie in equipping financial institutions and financiers with gender-informed policies, providing financial literacy trainings, as well as creating new partnership with informal financial markets. Although there are a lot of hurdles, such as poverty, discrimination, and also lack of institutional support, also continues to fuel gender disparity access to finance and venture capital. So just very quickly, I'm going to touch on what are the biggest opportunities and innovations towards financial inclusion for women. What can venture capitalist funds and investors do better to address the gender funding gap? And how do we promote a more effective understanding and implementation of the financial inclusion products and strategies? So very quickly, one of the opportunities that the African woman is faced with. The first is the access. Access in the sense of eligibility to credit facilities. You find out that when criteria on obtaining credit facilities are then made, the African woman may not even meet some of these criteria. Also, from a social norm perspective, it also shows that there's sometimes a holding back for women who are constrained by popular societal expectations. So the African woman in itself may have thought not to aspire so much, may be caught in the web of not excelling financially in order not to bruise the egos of our male counterparts. We also have the bespoke product design. This actually speaks to where financial institutions develop certain financial products that may not be properly targeted towards the low and medium income cadres. Now, what needs to then be done to address this is to see how financial products can be developed in areas of microfinance, microinsurance, and micro pensions, such that this they are easy products, easy understood products for the women within these categories in the low and income cadres to actually develop efforts towards digital savings, credit and payment services, as well as provide them with a gateway to a greater economic security and personal empowerment. Also, leveraging technology. As you're all aware, technology evolution has radically changed the financial institutions. And according to the Global Findex database, it appears that the share of sub-Saharan African adults with a mobile money account has nearly doubled from a 12% to a 21%. And this number is actually growing across the globe, and how people want to embrace mobile money accounts to pay bills, move monies, buy goods, and what have you. Also, with respect to investment, this is also a critical, challenging area for the African woman. The profit orientation of financial institutions actually inhibits their drive to ensure financial inclusion, as this has also come at an immediate cost that the business may be hesitant to bear. Initiatives for financial inclusion should be viewed beyond the role of financial institutions. Not-for-profit organizations also have a role to play in sponsoring target initiatives to embrace female inclusion. Also, we have engagements. Outreach and mentorship is an important model for a sustainable financial inclusion. It is not enough to fund, but guidance and support of each beneficiary is key to keep them on track with their goals. Also, we have education as one of the opportunities that the African woman is faced with. And as you're all aware, knowledge actually opens up for opportunities. The drive for female education to the grassroots cannot be overemphasized as an enabler for the improved female financial inclusion. More can actually be done to bridge the gap on the access of funding for women, considering some of the opportunities that we have listed. It will then require deliberate strategies and investment to actually close this gap. While the rewards may be long-term, it sure yields exponential positive results. The success stories of this empowerment should be the pride of financial institutions and other investment groups that actually pioneer this initiative. So very quickly, I would quickly touch on what can venture capitalists and investors do better to address gender funding gap. First and foremost, there needs to be a lot of research and analysis. As you're aware, there's a lot of data around female inclusion, but they then need to be more focused on how these data are analyzed to give the right insights and steer the right strategic business decisions. So again, focusing on key questions such as the who, the what, the why. This would actually go a long way when some of these researches and analyses are being carried out. Also, investors and venture capitalists need to start rethinking their strategy. The corporate strategy should take into account the drive for female financial inclusion. Also, they then need to look beyond profits. There's a need to shift from the perspective of profit orientation to value orientation. Non-financial impact is just as important as financial profitability. Then, investors and financial opportunities and venture capitalists, they also need to think long-term. The benefits of investing in financial inclusion drives are not just short-term and very quick fix. They are rather long-term, and they have far-reaching effects beyond just the financials. Also, a lot needs to be done around reach out. Supporting the female financial inclusion drive will require corporates to move out of their comfort zone to seek their target participants. Just to quickly conclude, in order to promote a more effective understanding and implementation of financial inclusion products and strategies, it's important that we need to get involved and be intentional about this. We need to promote not-for-profit action groups that actually support female financial inclusion in Africa. And then there's a lot that needs to be done, when it comes to collaborating, partnership, with those that want to drive these initiatives would actually go a long way. And lastly, set and track targets. This would also help female inclusion in Africa once appropriate policies are set, and this is also adequately tracked and monitored to be sure that all is being done to address the current gap that we have. At this point, I would like to say thank you, everyone, for listening, and I would like to call the moderator. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so very much, Olashubomi Oshibodu. That was an excellent presentation. Please give her a round of applause again. Thank you, Olashubomi. So we're going to be moving now into the panel discussion, and I'm going to be introducing our speakers. And I think I would just invite them in the order in which our speakers are sitting. So I will start with my sister, the founder and CEO of the Chair Center, one of Nigeria's leading manufacturing companies, Mrs. Ibukun Awoshika. You're welcome, ma'am. I will go to Mr. Gregor Vinkert, who is the CEO of BD Consulting and also former director of the World Bank. You're very welcome, Mr. Greg. I would now like to invite Ms. Valerie Name, founder of Invicte and also Braza. Please come over. Thank you. Braza Transactions. You are waiting for me to complete the introduction. I would now like, last and definitely not the least, Mr. Paul Harry Atnard, Managing Director, EcoBank, Côte d'Ivoire. You're most welcome. Yes, please. Thank you very much, gentlemen and ladies. It's a pleasure to have you as speakers on this committee, on this panel. Maybe by the time we're done with our work, a committee will be established to resolve the problems. And by the way, it's been said in Africa that we spend a lot of time discussing. Everybody knows the solutions to all our problems. I think the question we have is who's going to implement them? So perhaps by the end of today's panel discussion, we would also have an implementation group, a committee. So I don't know why I called us a committee. But you are all very welcome once again, ladies and gentlemen. And I'm going to go straight into the questions. So how do we unlock financial inclusion opportunities for the women of Africa? what is the role of the financial services players? What's the role of the venture capital funds? What's the role of the women ourselves? What's the whole role of the entire communities in which we operate? What should we as experts and leaders? Clearly, as you can see, everybody on this panel is a leader with extensive leadership track record. Now, just to set the stage, we need to remember that it is a challenge. We have learned that 37%, barely 37% of our women in Africa are financially included. We have learned that barely 1% of funding that has been raised in recent times in this market for VC techs, barely 1% has ended up in the hands of women. So I will start again with you, Mrs. Ibukun Awoshika. You held a position as chair of one of the leading banks in West Africa. So the question is this: what are the challenges that are inhibiting, the access to funding by women? And what should financial services providers be doing better to improve the situation? And by the way, to achieve accelerated progress, because unfortunately, we can't wait for the 100, 200 years that we have seen in all the analyses that it will take to even the playing field. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Toyin. Well, the challenges are huge, and if we are serious about taking them on, then we're going to have to be intentional, deliberate, engaging, and invest behind it. We have many barriers to break. There's cultural, there's knowledge in terms of the women, there are external challenges, but there are also challenges of the mindset of women themselves. And when we are honest about the fact that you cannot ignore 50% of the population. In fact, if you see the statistics that Shibumi put up, there are more women than men. So we're talking about 50-point-something% of the population on the continent are women. Now, as a business person, that's an area you want to invest in. And even if they are not prepared in the form that they exist for what you need, what does that mean as a business person? You build your own marketplace. You invest in educating the women to break down every barrier that is a challenge. And once you do that, and as chair of First Bank, one of the first things I did as I started in that office, being a woman and a young woman who started business at the age of just before my 26th birthday, I've spent almost 35 years as an entrepreneur. So I'd walked the journey of what we were trying to deal with. And I thought, this is this 122-year-old financial institution, and women was not a major product line. So I decided that was the thing I was going to take on. And the first thing we did was to spend a year taking the product team to go everywhere it was speaking with me, to listen to the women, but also to create questionnaires to ask the women specific questions that gave us the results, the information that was required to then develop a product line targeted at the women and an investment behind educating women on building personal wealth and using that to teach them about finances and giving them a goal as a structure. In the first year, with minimal investment but a lot of effort, the women put in over 21 billion naira just by educating, and we hadn't even scratched the surface. And this was just Nigeria. So when you invest and you're deliberate and you're intentional about it, and you see the women seriously as assets that they are, you will get your result.
Thank you so very much, Mrs. Awoshika. So I hear you saying we should be intentional, deliberate, we should have clear targets, and very importantly, we should put our money where our mouth is. So it must be investment backed. It speaks also to the point that was made by the expert. And one of the points when she was talking about opportunities was product creation, that we have to create products that will address this clearly untapped market opportunity. I'm going to go straight. So thank you again, Mrs. Awoshika. That was brilliant. I'm going to go straight to Gregor and Brinkert, and I'm just going to say, Gregory, you have spent a significant amount of your working life working for the World Bank. How do you see the role of multilateral institutions in cracking this nut? How would what would you recommend? Thank you.
No, thank you very much, Ms. Toyin-Sani. And yes, I spent 18 years at the World Bank. The multilateral institution, whether it's the World Bank, it's the African Development Bank, they do have an important role, for example, when it comes to research. I think a lot of basic research is being sponsored by them. Smaller banks may not have the resources for this kind of research. So it is very important. So whether that's also the role of women in economics, in the economies, but also in the financial sector, a lot of the numbers come from them. And then they also have specific programs. For example, IFC. They have a number of programs targeted to women. They announced very proudly they've already invested over $3 billion. But then also even their own research shows that actually the gap is $300 billion per year. So the $3 billion that they've invested over several years is not even 1% of the gap. So in that sense, we have to be realistic. They're not going to solve the problem by themselves. It's a small contribution. They do wonderful research. They have good programs that can show the results, but these results are very small. So we have to find different ways of how to scale it up, how to make it much, much bigger, and create the alliances to do that. It has to go beyond those banks, but they have good research. They're very good, they're excellent in that sense, in that limited sense.
Thank you so very much. So again, invest more. They're barely scratching the surface. They have a key role to play. We appreciate the intention that they have expressed, but they need to really scale up their interventions. Very well noted. Thank you. Thank you, Greg. So I'm going to go to Valerie. Valerie, you've done extensive work in financial consulting and in venture capital. So how do you see the role of venture capitalists? What can venture capitalists, how can venture capitalists support African women? What can your funds and investors do better to address the gender funding gap? Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Toyin. Thank you, everyone. I would like to say it's a privilege to be on stage with Mrs. Ibukun, Greg, and Mrs. Toyin, and everyone. I know I'm not supposed to say that, but it's a real privilege. I couldn't help it. It just goes to show that, they are doing a great job, and the next generation is taking over. We've been well trained. Thank you, Mrs. Toyin. Thank you. Thank you, men, too. To go back to the question, Mrs. Toyin, it's a question that is very dear to my heart for many reasons. I see here a real missed opportunity. We saw the numbers with Ola. I think Mrs. Ibukun mentioned some of the numbers as well. 50% of the world population are women. 50% of the continent, women. So we're actually talking about 50% missed opportunity in any sector. So before even investing in any research to look for what can I do to make money, I think anybody should just invest in women. Anything women is a niche itself. So the reason why I joined WFC, or Women Working for Change, is because I felt that we as women should showcase that it is possible. Money is not the problem. It's, are you financeable? And I'll use one of the statistics. 37%, it was said earlier, women have never asked for a loan. 37% never asked for a loan. They have a bank account, but they've never asked for a loan. I don't know if Paul-Henri will agree with me on this. As EcoBank, for me, it's outrageous. It stops me from sleeping. It's not, every time people say, what is poverty? Poverty is ignorance. It's lack of information. So when I look at the numbers, they said 2.2 billion venture capitalist funds invested every year in Africa. Out of these $2.2 billion, 1% goes to women. It's ridiculous. What are we doing? What are we thinking? So it means that all the female entrepreneurs that we see in Africa, knowing that 72% of Africa's economy is driven by women, how come the same women don't go and seek for financing? Two things. Either they were made to believe that they can't, which is true, because statistics says again, from Bank of America, that 52% of women, no, actually, 52% of women believe that men can actually run their business better than they themselves. I was shocked. Why? Cultural bias. So, yes, Africans, we do talk, but it has to start from somewhere. We need to talk and talk and talk, and then one day people will realize that they too, they can do it. And with the examples like yourself, Mrs. Toyin, Mrs. Ibukun, women can see that, there are success stories out there, and they too are not just for microfinancing or for financing, but actually they belong to the venture capitalist level.
Thank you so very much, Valerie. Points very well taken, because when you compare 1% to 50%, the difference is so huge. I'm going to come to you, Paul Harry, as CEO of EcoBank Côte d'Ivoire. I would like to know what financial institutions like yours are doing to close the gender gap, even beginning with account opening. Thank you.
Thanks so much. So there are some facts that you notice when you go on the terrain, which are basically, women are really entrepreneurs in Africa. I mean, when you go on the ground and you go into the market, what you see are women being entrepreneurs. So we started from that point of departure, and then we said to ourselves, okay, how can we push those women to make sure that they need to go bigger, they need to take a big step forward, and the best way to do it is to equip them. Equip them with two things. One, education, financial literacy. They have to understand what's the meaning of 1 + 1 = 2. They have to understand what's the meaning of saving to invest. So you need to spend some time with them, to train them, equip them with education, financial literacy. If you do that, at least you have the fundamentals. Then the second thing that you need to do is to prepare them for the future. And like it or not, the future is about digital. The future is about technology. 20 years ago, when you are selling bananas, the only marketplace that you have, that's your area. That's it. Today, you can sell bananas to someone sitting in Hong Kong by staying in your home. So you need to equip them as well with digitization, and that's one of the things that EcoBank we are trying to push forward as well. How can we provide digital equipment, digital solution, providing the tools that are going to help those women to have access to markets that they thought that they will never have access to. So I think if we do those two things, definitely, actually we will do what I call the wealth formation, which is, if you think about it, what you need to do globally as a country, as a continent. How can we form wealth? How can we create wealth? So if we do those things, if we promote those women, I think that we're going to go into the right direction.
Thank you so very much, Paul Harry. So I hear you saying we need to equip the women. We need to equip them not just with education and financial literacy, but also with digital technology, information, and exposure, such that they can scale their businesses beyond the local markets. And I thank you, and I'm going to come back to you. Hopefully you'll be able to give me some specific instances in which your institution intervened. If there's a some project you can talk about very briefly, it will be great. So I'm coming back to you, Mrs. Awushika. You founded a manufacturing company at the tender age of 26. Today, it's a leading player. So what kind of obstacles did you face in terms of financing your dream? What is still stopping, many more women like you from coming out of Africa? And how can the problem be fixed? Remember, we're not just a panel now. At the beginning, we declared that we're a committee. Thank you.
Okay. Well, I don't even think we should go back to almost 35 years ago. Some banks wouldn't even give me a bank opening account form because I was a young girl and I was in their target market. And there weren't facilities available. So times have changed. There are a lot of grants, there's microfinance. Then I would take finance house money, which was really expensive money, but I worked with what was available in order to drive my vision. The thing right now is the entrepreneurial energy that is so abundant on the continent has no respect for gender. It's male or female, and the girls are driving it hard. So what do we need to do? First, to educate them to understand numbers and understand the financial system. Know how money works. But more than that, know how to get what they need. And part of it is how do they keep their records? How do they build accounts that make them attractive to the banks? How are they able to go after grants and possibilities and opportunities? I serve on the IC of Alethea IDF, and that's probably the only, if not the leading, totally female gender-based private equity fund helping to scale up businesses. And it's amazing what we see from the north to the south to the east to the west of this continent in terms of women building companies that with an injection of a minimum amount, $1 million, $2 million, any of those, the growth is dramatic in terms of what they can do. But we also then need to teach girls from the onset to build the structure that will make them qualify to take loans and facilities. A girl sets up a business at 26, 27, 28. Who is her chairman? If she's married, it's her husband. When they're buying properties, somehow, the asset is in the name of the spouse. And so she doesn't have it in her name. She doesn't use the money from the business to build assets for her business in order to meet the collateral requirement of the financial institutions on the continent. So when she gets to the stage where she does need finances, she's not structured to qualify to do it. So we've got to tweak how we do these things, which is why we need to design products that meet the woman where she is, because research has shown that women are better credit debtors. They will pay back, at least to a large percentage. And you can stage it and give it to them at different levels and find different other kind of structures that allows you to give them the money. But I can say categorically, based on performance records from our first GEM product that we had, our first bank, and the work we're doing at Alethea, the women of Africa are amazing in terms of what they're building. And when you give them the opportunity and stand with them, the way they move just tells you that the missing link for this continent for its growth is the women and the young people. And if we stop putting all the money behind the old, traditional, normal, same people who take a loan from every bank on the continent, then we will grow and we will do what we need to do.
Thank you so much, Mrs. Awoshika. And honestly speaking, I can confirm everything you have said. You know about the history of Emerging Africa. You know that we're female-led, gender-focused, and we have so far recorded zero, absolute zero default from any of the women, all the women we have dealt with. So why would people not want to put their money behind a market segment that is gaping open, where most of your players are not there, and where the risks, to some extent, and in some regards, are actually lower? But I guess we will get there. So I'm going to you, Greg, and obviously, this is a problem that can't be solved by operators alone or the women alone. So I want to go to the policy angle. What is the role of policymakers? What should policymakers be doing? What practical steps? And you've been country director of World Bank in at least 6 African countries, and you've dealt with policymakers, you've dealt with governments at highest level. What should policymakers be doing at this point? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Can I maybe just another small point? What was not said when I came across sort of what I mentioned, some of this research before. So one of the research that was done by IFC together with a very large bank from Pakistan is when they trained the managers in the banks. And they could actually then compare the branches where managers were trained in gender awareness to the branches where the managers were not trained in gender awareness. And the ones where the managers were trained, they had 10% more deposits from women makers. So not just the women, it's also the managers of the financial system. They need a lot of training, awareness, how to do it. Then it has to do with designing the products. I mean, that also comes from awareness, otherwise you don't. So the exercise that you did, you took your managers to talk to all the women, design the products. This is a very important. The financial sector itself is the target, not only the women that may borrow or deposit money. So that was just a general comment, and I thought it was very interesting. With regard to policy, of course, it is very important whether it's government itself, of central banks, of course, are always key in those kind of regulations as well. And what I find to be a very big challenge is we're not very good at dealing with the informal sector. And if we don't, that interface between the formal banking system and the informal sector, that is still very, very weak. And unless we sort of have new approach with the new technology, the fintech, what started with M-Pesa in Kenya almost 20 years ago, that started a whole new thinking with mobile money, and eventually you can save. So I think technology has huge opportunities, but it's also, even this morning we also discussed, now of course new requirements come in terms of KYC, know your customers, new requirements come in what's called AML, the anti-money laundering legislation. They all of a sudden starts making things a lot more complicated again. And this morning was said by the CEO of Equity Bank, so the banks need to work very closely with the central bank, with the policymakers to find regulation that makes sense at the end, that can be done. It's very important, this kind of dialogue, and how to deal with the informal sector. And bank the informal sector, which almost by definition includes a lot of women automatically, if you know how to do it.
Thank you, Greg. Thank you so much. And you're so right. And again, if I can draw perspective from what we did in Nigeria, at a point in time, the Securities and Exchange Commission had to agree with the market to come up with very special and different KYC requirements for mutual funds, because these were mutual funds that we wanted people to come with as little as 1,000 naira. So we were targeting retail investors, we were targeting people at the lowest level, so to speak, and we needed to simplify the process of getting into the system for them. And also from a risk-based perspective, you have to recognize that the risks of the kind of AML challenges are very low at that level. So regulators, what I hear you saying is that regulators must be flexible, policymakers must be flexible and must be innovative to respond to the needs, especially of the informal sector.
And maybe also one example of the informal sector, which is now also being, again, in Eastern Africa, I know it better, which is big data. So that's a new technology with big data. So then you can assess the credit risk of an individual or a group based on behavior. So it doesn't matter anymore whether the house is in the name of her or the husband or the father or somebody else. It's financial behavior. And big data makes that possible with all the different databases. This will be very, very important. But once again, they will run into regulatory issues which can be resolved, need to be resolved. But there's a lot of opportunity in this new technology and the big data approach. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Greg. So I'm going to you, Valerie, and I'm going to ask you, what practical steps can be taken to increase the level of engagement and understanding of investment and investment products by women?
Thank you once again. Please allow me to go back to Mrs. Ibukun's point about collateral for women. I ran a family business for almost 10 years. And one of the key things that really struck me at the time was the fact that women had to involve their husband to get a loan, whereas men did not have to. So, it's a true story. You know, I decided that, okay, whether it was a Cameroonian policy or law, I would change the things. So if a woman comes and needs a loan, I will not require the husband's approval. It was a risk, but you know, we shoot off in terms of loan acquisitions and of, again, zero default from women. So to go back to the question you asked to Greg, what can government do? I think policies are very important because they structure the market. But again, to answer the question, what could be done? I like these stories these days. Every time I take the floor, I share it with my audience. The Congo Basin today is, for me, an opportunity for Africa. Why? Because we are the second largest forest on Earth after the Amazonian forest. Wow. The second biggest one is the Congo Basin. So after COP27, all our presidents are back. We don't hear anything from them. What are the products? What are the services that you are coming to, that you're bringing back for us on the continent? Whereas we have green financing everywhere. Everywhere. You go to the Scandinavian countries, they have green product lined up for women, for anybody who is interested. We're talking about solar, power, renewable, hydro, and again, surprise, surprise, the Congo Basin, again, is the second largest hydro in terms of rivers, ocean, second, and Greg is here, second hydro. How come we are not leading as Africans in terms of green financing? It troubles me. It really troubles me. It means forever we want to be passive and wait for the world to move and then we follow when we have the opportunity to actually lead this green financing revolution. Greg always says that for any economy to grow, you need capital. Yeah. You need infrastructure. For infrastructure, you need capital. For capital, you need you need to position yourself. It doesn't even have anything to do with your resources. It has to do with your mindset. I remember that when I was a child, I remember Cameroon sending money to Malaysia, to help Malaysia. And today when I travel to Malaysia and to Vietnam, I wonder, what have we done? Is it a curse? I don't know, Mrs.
Thank you.
What is the problem? How can we be helping a country like Malaysia and Vietnam 20 years down the line?
Thank you
they
so
are
much,
a
Valerie.
leading country in Asia. So it's a mindset. They wanted to make a difference and they did it.
Thank you so much, Valerie. I deliberately interrupted you because I didn't want us to go there. Nigeria has a Malaysia story. I'm sure Mrs. Awoshika is aware. Practically every African country has a Malaysia story. But the points that I think I hear you making, first of all, is that we need to look inward, that we have certain phenomena that already give us some competitive advantage, such as like our forests, a lot of massive green, land. So why are we not using it? We need to be also innovative and creative. And I thank you for those contributions. And by the way, talking about women investing again, and it comes back to the same points that everybody has made, starting with Mrs. Awoshika, and also that our speaker made, which is product creation and product innovation. I know, for example, that we're not telling our stories enough. Women-led businesses and also women-led and managed funds consistently outperform others. I had the privilege of introducing the first women gender fund that was listed on the Nigerian Stock Exchange, quoted on the Nigerian Stock Exchange, and recently again introduced another similar fund approved by the SEC. And these funds consistently outperform other funds. So how are we telling the stories? Who are we telling the stories to? How are we getting the women to have a sense of ownership and pride in these stories? And how are we getting more women into the space? Now I'm going to come to you, Paul Harry. And I think my second question will take off from what we're just talking about, what banking products. And by the way, I'm giving you an opportunity here to sell yourself. So what banking products and services do females utilize the most? What insights can you glean from this trend to improve female financial inclusion? So your experience, what have you seen the women going for, and how can we use that to bring more women into the net?
Thank you. I like the point about green financing. I think it's a strong point, and we need to do something about it. So the way that we wanted to approach it in EcoBank is, as I said earlier, we understood clearly that if we solve the financial literacy problem, then we're going to move forward in solving the access to finance issue. So we set up a program that we call Elevate. And the basis of that program basically is to say that we will give you financing, but before you get the financing, you're going to get training, and we're going to digitize you. Okay? So you get financing, but you need to be trained, and you need to get digitized. So we set it up across Africa. Our ambition is to do it in the next 5 years for 350,000 MSMEs owned by women. In Côte d'Ivoire, we launched the same program last year, and we designed it in a way that we built a partnership with different entities in the country, because we knew that if we want to have access, we can't do it by ourselves. So we need to build those partnerships. So we built, for the training angle, for example, we built a partnership with a entity that is named AFIS. And what they are doing basically is that every year they're going to gather 1,000 entrepreneurs, women, and then they're going to train them. And out of those women, there will be 100 that they're going to propose to us. They will call, they will do a pitch, and then after the pitch, we're going to support them. Those businesses, we're going to provide digital products to them, we're going to provide training to them, and then we try to grow them. That is at the base of the pyramid. The next thing that you can do as well, because sometimes, and that's the mistake, when we are talking about women empowerment, we always think about women at the base of the pyramid. In reality, even when you go into the boards, you have the same issue sometimes, right? So we set up also a partnership with a management school in Paris and London, and the purpose is to equip those women with MBAs. So those businesses that are solid, they have a track record, they understand financial literacy, they are medium-sized, but they want to go to the next step. So what you need to do, you provide them with an MBA, and then they are stronger, they can become bigger, and they can become successful. So we did that for last year. We financed MBAs with some other DFIs for 12 women businesses, and the plan is to continue to build up on that momentum. Now, we need to understand as well that the issue of financing is not only an issue about debt. Okay, it's not only debt the issue. So when you say that what kind of products those women are looking for, it's not only loans. If you think through it, and I'm a banker, but I don't like debt. I prefer equity. So when you think through it, yeah, you provide them with loans, but you're not going to solve, and you're not going to design businesses that are going to become tomorrow the next EcoBank, the next Pan-African champion, if you load them with loans. What we need to do is to see how we can design product. And one of the things that I'm a strong believer into is how can we promote more venture capital, more private equity firms, more equity vehicles in Africa that are going to be supporting those women-led businesses? And I think that for the way forward, those are the issues that we need to tackle.
Thank you so much, Paul Harry. So I hear you saying, thank you. I hear you saying you have put your money where your mouth is. You have sponsored women, to the ones at the top, to take MBAs. All along the value chain, you have supported them with both education and digital products, and the need for patient long-term capital, which is what you're emphasizing. And that's really what needs to be behind these women to take them, to enable them to scale their businesses. So beyond loans, we have to look at equity. So important. So I'm coming back to you, Mrs. Awoshika, with a question that is dear to my heart. And just to set the stage, you mentor and you lead. You're one of the most recognized, faces. I mean, I've been out with you and I've seen, even here in this country, one of the most recognized faces of women in Africa. So I know you lead, you mentor, you encourage, you inspire women. Now, everywhere I look, and I'm talking about Nigeria, I don't know if it's the same in the rest of Africa, but I see all these eager, young, bright-eyed ladies. Most of them are not even going for a job again. They just want to start and run their own businesses. They drive these businesses on Instagram largely. Some of them have a day job, and then in their spare time, in Nigeria we call it our
Their hustle.
the side hustle. We call it the side hustle. So every young Nigerian girl has a side hustle. So how can we scale these side hustles and make them the cheer companies, the Imagine Africas of tomorrow? What are you saying to these girls?
I think the fact that they make it a side hustle is their lack of faith in the infrastructure to help them scale it. There's no person who has a vision and a dream to build something and can see the potential to take it to scale that will not drop a day's job where they have to report to anybody. So it's about us creating the infrastructure of opportunity, a system that allows them believe that they will get the right kind of support to drive what they need to. And because I work with so many young people, structurally, there are so many of them. And the reality, I mean, look at this room now. I don't know how many people are registered at this conference, but I'm embarrassed that we're talking about 50-point-something% of the population of the continent and the potential within them, and we have the minimum number or just a few believers in the matters of women. And it's not peculiar to AFIS. At any conference, the women's issue will always have a minimum number, and if it was something else, you would. And it just doesn't make sense to me, because the opportunities that is within it. Now, these girls are smart, they're driven, they can see the problems, they're innovating solutions, they want to build, they don't even think about their agenda. They're ready to compete one for one. And if you go to school, it's like in if you ask EcoBank, in the early stages, when you employ, the girls compete with the boys one for one. They're smart, they're brilliant, they get the job all the way to middle level. Yeah. Somewhere on the way to the top, they begin to drop off because of systemic structures. So what do we want to do? Provide infrastructure that gives them the opportunity to take the risk of leaving their job and turning their hustle into their job.
Thank you.
And then we will innovate to solve problems that we have. We have high unemployment. How do you create employment? You create businesses. How do you create businesses? You create entrepreneurs. You need every girl who has the capacity to build anything, getting the resources, put some money to risk. Let the banks decide 5% of our profit after tax will be put at risk. We'll just give it as grant equity for you to start a business. If you make money, you bank, which is what Tony is doing at UBA.
Absolutely.
But go and see the numbers. He's probably making a lot of money because all of them feel obliged to go to UBA with their business. Some will lose, but you will. Imagine if every single bank on the continent decides this is how we're going.
Absolutely.
Every girl with a dream will get the money to activate it. I don't think the world will be able to stand what Africa can do.
Thank you so much, ma'am. And if we talk about, that work that is being done by the Tony Elumelu Foundation, you find out that, back to the question that was posed to Greg earlier, you find out that so many multilateral institutions have come into that program because they see it's working and they're matching it with their money. So we need the multilaterals to match every such opportunity with money. Now I'm going to please appeal to all of us.
Put at
Well,
risk.
Thank you. Thank you so much. We were all supposed to go around one last time. It's now time to take questions from the audience, so I apologize that we're not going to do that, but we definitely want to take questions from those who are participating. Does anybody have a question for this panel? And if you do, could you please indicate so that a mic, thank you. I see the gentleman at the back. One question. I think, okay, thank you. Please introduce yourself. You have precisely 1 minute, and it's a question. Thank you.
Microphone. Your microphone is, we can't get. I followed the previous speakers. Almost similar, because we were talking about micro, small and medium-sized enterprises. We're talking about financial inclusion of women. As a stakeholder, I would introduce myself. Ayombo Tanu, Managing Director of ASECA Cooperative of Saving Credit for handicraft operators in Togo Lomé. My concern is that throughout this discussion, we did not focus on sectors that are more familiar in inclusive finance. I mean the micro, small and medium-sized enterprises. Now, I loved your testimony, ma'am. There was 30 years when she wanted to ensure or secure microcredit. It was microfinance institution, and she started growing. And it's calls for action for us. We should draw lessons. We want to identify the enablers that will allow us to promote inclusive finance, starting with the micro, small and medium-sized enterprises. As far as I'm concerned, there are three. Financial education, I believe the speakers dwelt at length on it. Financial education adapted to the target groups that we want to promote. Aside this, better blend between bank insurance and microfinance institution. And the third element is that states should be guarantors in order to boost this concept of financial inclusion. And finally, we need to grow the economy of these SMEs, broadly speaking. Thank you.
Panel to your question.
Actually, there was no question. Okay. So there was no question, but I just pour donner un peu de
just to provide some guidance. In reality, sir, the three elements you referred to: financial education, guarantees by the states, and collaboration between microfinance and insurance companies. In reality, these exist already. Financial education, we refer to these. We need a tremendous effort in providing financial education, collaboration between finance, microfinance and insurance. We should go beyond this. We need to create what we call a chain of financing, as I call it. There must be telecom operators, microfinance, the banks, the insurance, all stakeholders who can bring the might to this endeavor. The guarantee systems, yes. It cannot be given only by the states. Our states do not have finance that are extensible. We also need to use, and that is what is used by the banks, we also need to use portfolio guarantee systems offered by the AFIS that makes it possible to provide this type of system. Yes, for your elements, but I believe we need to go beyond. But these elements exist today. But I agree with the point you made. The system should be as decentralized as possible and closer to the communities. I gave an answer to a question which never existed. Thank you. Alors je vous donne chacun une minute aux autres panélistes, ceux qui n'ont pas eu la chance de faire valoir leur argument. Je commence par vous, Valérie. Oui, ben si tu n'as pas de mot de fin, essayez de répondre à la question. I may want to call on all stakeholders to focus. Now, sir, you've made a good point. It worked well in Gabon. I was working then in Gabon. The Gabonese government provided a guarantee fund that assisted the banks and microfinances in supporting SMEs. Well, it worked on well then. I'm wondering if it's the same for this region. Anyway, in Gabon, that was positive. We may replicate this in other countries. To conclude, there are promising sectors today, and Africa should leverage on fintech, digitalization, new technologies, and even cryptocurrency. They are not asking for infrastructure we do not have, but they require new technology, so to say. We may want to leverage on this opportunity to be for once leaders rather than followers. I thank you.
Just some final words on the topic.
No, thank you very much. Maybe a slightly different approach. Also, a lot of issues are mindset issues. And actually, if I make a little provocative comment, I like Jeune Afrique very much. They organized it. But did you see the publication with the 300 leaders in African finance, the cover page? It's all men. There's not a single woman there on the cover of Jeune Afrique of this month. So even there, in Paris or wherever, we need to change mindsets so that it comes up.
I don't know if I can, and by the way, I'm not trying to, defend Jeune Afrique. I'm actually trying to give some counsel. And by the way, it speaks to one of the things we should be discussing today. So what happens is that you set some criteria and metrics, perhaps in terms of size, in terms of something or the other, and you don't recognize that you need to then begin to re-examine your metrics and change them as required in order to be more inclusive. And it doesn't just apply to this kind of rankings you're talking about. I think it should apply to all the decisions that we take. Once we recognize that we're in a world that is at least 50% women, once we recognize that there has been, this segment has been undermined, underrepresented, undervalued, and very importantly, underserved for generations, you must include criteria that will ensure that at the end of the day, what you come out with is inclusive. So it's no longer, you're not comparing apples with oranges. You have to compare apples with apples. So I think it's very important. I hope that not only Jeune Afrique, but everybody who has an opportunity to do this kind of rankings begin to understand. I know, for example, that we have groups like the YPO that say that you cannot join as a man if you're over 45. But for women, it's 55 because they recognize that women are disadvantaged. So all these things have to come together. It's a real pleasure moderating this panel. I have the most amazing group of speakers that anybody could ever have. I hope that the conversation can continue as we move into implementation mode. I have enjoyed Mrs. Awoshika, thank you so much. Greg Binker, thank you so much. Valerie, thank you so much. Harry Paul, Paul Harry, thank you very much. And Olashubomi Oshibodu, thank you for that great expert presentation. And thank you all for listening, and do enjoy the rest of the conference.